This morning I'm in the old burying grounds in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Today we're going to wander over to Mount Auburn Cemetery and check out what the rural cemetery movement brought to the States. Back in the turn from the 18th to the 19th century, a lot of graveyards up in this area look like this, overcrowded. Some of these graves are kind of cockeyed and crooked. So in 1831 they founded Mount Auburn, which was a large rural cemetery. Talk more about it when we get there. For now, this is the older burial ground and all these slate headstones. These things are so cool. The main purpose of the trip is to go to Mount Auburn and spend a bunch of time there. But I have to catch a train and transfer to a bus in Cambridge or at Harvard. And so I thought I'd pop into here to show what the cemeteries, quote, used to look like before the founding of the rural cemetery movement. Some of these older stones are going to have that skull with angel wings, or death's head with angel wings. And as they get newer, they put a baby face or a human face, not a skull, in between the wings. And then in the 1700s, the whole English garden movement brought about the concept of putting funerary monuments or monuments of sorts in the middle of a bunch of woods or a big field. They got passed around, and then they started putting willows and urns on headstones. These are from 1787. This is another good example, 1798, and a big urn on top. This bit of like haphazardness going through the cemetery. A couple more death heads. These are from the 1730s, it looks like. There's another urn, 1799. It's a pretty willow and an urn. 1829. They started carving these onto the top of the headstones, and they were like, wait, what if we just did this in real life? And they went and founded Mount Auburn. 1840. Beautifully carved here. That death's head, got two little cherubs or babies holding the hourglass. All trying to remind you, you're gonna die too. Here's some other pretty examples here. Death's head with an hourglass on top. I'm here in the old Granary burial ground in Boston. I'm shooting this on my phone. These are what the cemeteries looked like before Mount Auburn existed. With all the carvings.
in all this downtown chaos that they wanted to remove the cemeteries to the countryside. This is King's Chapel Burial Ground. It's another example of how filled up a lot of these graveyards are in downtown Boston before the founding of Mount Auburn. It's an underground tomb right there. Some of the carvings are really pretty in here.
Today I'm in beautiful Mount Auburn Cemetery. It was founded as a rural cemetery in 1831, the first of its kind, which then led to a nationwide craze of establishing rural cemeteries. And check out some of the pretty sights. I read a couple history books on this cemetery, Silent City on a Hill and A Lively Place. I just finished the new book, Pleasure Grounds of Death, Rural Cemeteries in the 19th Century. This here is Spruce Knoll. This cemetery came about in the 1820s. Boston was running into issues in their old burial grounds where they were having to bury them 3 and 4 deep. There was a whole fear of miasmas or disease spreading from rotting corpses. So they had the idea to come out here and create a rural cemetery a couple miles outside of Boston, out here in Cambridge. The whole basis of the rural cemetery came about through English picturesque gardens from the 1700s, where wealthy Englishmen with a bunch of acreage would create these picturesque landscapes, and where it was to look natural as opposed to manicured. There was also a whole movement of mourning pictures, or I don't know what they're called, where they would like have photos of, you know, a single monument in a field and a woman mourning next to it. They came out to Cambridge here, and this whole idea was to create a landscape that looked natural and had graves intermixed. Over time, the cemetery filled up, and now you've got something a little more like this. In reading A Lively Place, it showed me that I should focus more on just getting lost in this cemetery as opposed to having a certain script to stick to. There are some notable burials through here. Henry Longfellow, who wrote a lot of poetry that was then used in the Victorian era. Some of his quotes and stuff you'll find on headstones. But I've decided to just sort of wander through this cemetery. There's a couple spots I want to see, but aside from that, I'm just going to kind of show the beauty of this cemetery. This tall monument in the background here that I'm going to be walking to is the grave of Mary Baker Eddy. If you've ever heard of the Christian Science movement, she is the founder of it. One thing I really love about this cemetery is there's a lot of pathways. If you just drive through this cemetery, you're going to miss a lot of this. There's an old slate headstone there. Not old, but that old style. When they first found this cemetery, they didn't allow slate headstones because they were going for a new look, and the slate headstones would make the rural landscape too gloomy. Ultimately, they allowed them, clearly. I'm here in Consecration Dell. September 24th, 1831, this cemetery was consecrated in this spot. Thousands of visitors, or attendees, whatever you want to call it, came to listen. It's a glacial remnant. I'm not a geologist or whatever you want to call it, but this little pit here was formed. And when this cemetery was designed, many of the pathways were designed to wind around these hills in the landscape. Very beautiful. I don't know where exactly everyone stood, but just imagine almost 200 years ago, thousands of people, everyone's coming out here. They're going to have a new burial spot out here outside of Boston. Here's a little interpretive sign, 2,000 people. In the 1840s and 50s, a lot of these cast iron fences went up around some of the plots. Started to take away from the breadth of the landscape, bifurcating it into lots. Maybe not bifurcate, but whatever. Over time, those cast iron fences dilapidate and rust and fall apart. And between them falling apart and the effect it had on the cemetery, they went in and removed a lot of the fencing. Might not be the best way to describe it, but read Silent City on a Hill. It's a really good book. It talks all about this cemetery. I have more of a desire to just show how beautiful the cemetery is and not try to speak too much on the history or know-how, because sometimes I'll read half a page and forget what I read. It doesn't really take any effort at all just to show how beautiful this place is. There's a little chipmunk on top of that. Here are some of the early examples. Some of the stones here is from 1834. Still has that willow and urn motif. It also has marble. There's a huge implementation of marble through this cemetery as the technology of quarrying increased and the invention of the railroad. Some of these larger monuments were more accessible. I'm on top of Washington Tower. It's kind of in the middle of the cemetery. All around us here is Mount Auburn Cemetery. There's Boston out in the distance. I think it's about 4 miles from here to downtown Boston. part of the picturesque landscape and the rural cemetery movement. If you were a rich English landlord with lots of land, you needed a tower, a nice tower. And so this cemetery built Washington Tower to overlook the grounds. I bet this would be beautiful in a couple months from now when all these leaves fall. You'll really be able to see the cemetery. Right now it just looks like we're in the middle of a forest. This is one of the paths here I got a really pretty picture of in the spring one year when I was here. Some of this growth wasn't here. It's just really pretty with the large obelisks. Again, all these little hidden pathways and whatnot. You really need to get out of your car and walk to see all the cemetery. Some of these far back sections get into the later lawn cemetery, lawn style or Memorial Park cemetery ultimately. All the flat headstones. Here's a little touch of fall right here, with all the leaves falling. Here's another lake view with the true weeping willow there on the right across the lake, or pond. When this cemetery was originally founded, it was a non-denominational cemetery. On the other side of that wall there is the Catholic cemetery, which is a separate cemetery. The landscaping in this cemetery is next level. Like they've got like these cool like little tiny water features. Weeping stuff. Look at that. I read in a lively place in like the spring or something, there's this whole thing with salamanders and they go out and they breed. I think it's mainly in Consecration Dell or some of the other ponds. And there's a whole society that are into salamanders that come and watch the mating of the salamanders. This is Thomas Blanchard. He invented the machine lathe, and he's got it carved on the sides of his monument. There's the other side here. Pretty cool. Go across the way here and check out this. This was dedicated to the Union dead in 1872. It's installed by Bigelow. It's also named for this chapel. It was built twice. First time they built it, it was falling apart and they couldn't get the stain off the outside. And so they rebuilt it. This is a good example of the memorialization and change in how monuments were made. It's a woman mourning at an urn. They used to just carve it on there, and now they'll just put a whole urn in there. There's a bagpipe in there somewhere. That's where I started my video. That's the Asa Gray garden, experimental garden. And giant rose quartz, I think. Another thing Silent City on a Hill talked about was a bunch of underground vaults that were installed in the style of the old burying grounds. And so there's, I forgot how many, there's loads of these things throughout the cemetery, and many of them are sealed off and covered with turf. It makes me think about hundreds of years from now, what sort of art might be discovered beneath these. Some of this iron fencing does still remain. You can see where some of it fell apart or damaged, was taken away. Over here is one of the most expensive monuments, I think for like the time it was carved. Most expensive marble monuments here. The Binney Monument. Covered in a shroud. Flames. Upside down. An angel. Silent City on a Hill had some pictures of some of the advertising that the companies that made this iron fencing had in the area. These are super ornate. There's like a whole like central column. It's a sugar maple tree. Look at all that fungus. This guy here was the creator of the express business. He was the first guy to use the word express in terms of mailing stuff, like Federal Express. And his monument reflects that, delivering mail. Another rose quartz right there in the middle. Seen like 4 or 5 of those things. There's a winged hourglass at the top of this thing. This is the grave of Joseph Story. He's one of the guys that spoke at the consecration. He did a lot more than that. I don't remember it all. But do look him up, Joseph Story, on like Wikipedia or something. It's like a winged shell. It's really pretty. The way these are on the hill here makes you wonder how far back they go, how many bodies they can fit, what sort of art might be inside these. It's been long sealed away. This is like the upper ridge that is only accessible on foot. You can see the Catalpa path. It's just like a little grass pathway that takes you through the cemetery. Right at here, at the confluence of this path and the Indian Ridge, is Henry Longfellow. This is the main entrance to Mount Auburn Cemetery. It's an Egyptian style gate, originally built in wood and painted to look like stone. It's the old entrance for carriages and horses, and on either side of it is the new car entrance.
I'm down here in the experimental garden of the cemetery. I am wore out and ready to go home. On to the next.